Morning everyone, and welcome you all to our webinar today. It is gratifying to note that the agenda of today's webinar covers a wide range of future relevant topics. It's heartwarming to see a happy bunch of participants on a Sunday morning. Welcome to you all for responding to our call and being here. ABN, the business networking arm of ITA, has been engaging you all with lively sessions with the objective of helping you hit the refresh button on emerging trends on a range of topics. The third anniversary of ABN is celebrated amidst the comforting verdict of its innumerable entrepreneurs after having donned the savior cloak of several alumni. No misadventures, no mistakes, no mess, no mystery. Riding the crest of an entrepreneur wave, when the sentiment of market man was at its low ebb, ABN has created new patterns on its growth curve in a span of 3 years, with strong fundamentals, buoyancy in members, scintillating array of business transactions. We made the right move at the right time, brought cheers to the genuine entrepreneurs, and hence a year to rejoice. The enigma of ABN is to create a new era in ITA in the years ahead. Through this phase of extended lockdowns over the past few months, we have been able to put together a weekly online program to keep our ABN community not just engaged, but also meet a range of inspiring people who can help shape your ideas and thoughts. Today we have with us our distinguished alumni, Mr. S. Damodharan, 1989 batch chemical engineering, to deliberate on the topic Pharma industry, a growth perspective. Pharma majors touched on the scope of API industry, opportunities, challenges, and threats. Active pharma ingredients or bulk drugs or the principal ingredients for finished pharmaceutical products. There are two ingredients required for manufacturing medicine: active ingredient and inactive ingredient. India is importing API from China in huge quantities. But with factory shutdowns in China and disruption in the supply chain, things have again come to a full circle. At current prices, these products have again become viable to manufacture in India. This, along with the fact that the world has realized that dependence on a single source can cause disruption in the availability of drugs. This realization mainly after the current pandemic of COVID-19. India should use this situation to its advantage by increasing the production, which eventually will enable India to become an alternative to China in the world market. The potential of API industry is quite bright due to various factors. Predominant among them is that the projected growth of 10% over the next 5 years will thus be making India the top 10 pharma markets in the globe. Keeping in mind Atmanirbhar theme, MSME Minister Mr. Nitin Gadkari, through numerous webinars, appealed to our citizens that for strengthening our economy, we should concentrate on setting up new industries under the following two categories. Import substitute project, that is setting up industries of these products which we were importing from China. Last year, China did business with India to the tune of $100 billion US. Export-oriented projects, that is setting up of industries of those products which China was exporting to other countries of the world. This business in China last year was worth about $3,200 US billion. Hence, the objective of this webinar is to understand what are the projects which can be established to strengthen the pharma sector. Now, to give you all with a comprehensive profile of Mr. S. Damodharan, I will limit myself to a few that will capture the essence of his achievements and activities. Mr. Damodharan, fondly known as Damu, comes with an experience of 3+ decades with leading API and fine chemical companies in operations, process engineering, technology absorption, and project functions. He is currently heading the operations and R&D of Sai Life Sciences, creating a strong platform for growth. He is currently heading a futuristic initiative as Executive Vice President, Operational Excellence and New Technologies. In his role, he is responsible for transforming the organization to a next generation CDMO through a combination of capacity building, capability building, technology upgradation, and process re-engineering. Damu joined Sai Life Sciences in its early stages and is a part of the senior leadership which has been instrumental in growing Sai Life Sciences revenue from $25 million US to $100 million US. A veteran of the pharma industry, Damu has been associated with several companies such as Piramal Healthcare, DRL, Max India, Lupin, etc. He strives to adopt first-time correct approach and holds that creativity and talent grooming are his strengths. On the personal side, the university circles remember Damu for his warmth, love of sports, and his genuine value for friendship. He is one of the coolest and hassle-free guys I had interacted with in the campus. He'll be enlightening us all with some refreshing perspectives on pharma industry. Dear friends, put your hands together for this alumni from a university who has made an impact in pharma industry in his own way. Thank you all. Over to you, Damu.
Thank you. Thanks, Gopi, for a sort of a long introduction. So I don't know whether I deserve it, but great pleasure meeting you all. I think I see a lot of entrepreneurs here. So I always told that there are only two types of working class: employers, employees, and maybe the non-working. So I think you should all take pride in being entrepreneurs, because not only do you work, but also you provide employment opportunities to a lot of people. So thanks for taking the time out to listen to me, and it's a real pleasure and honor to be with you all. And thanks for taking the time out on a Sunday morning. So when Gopi and Tariq approached me to talk about the pharma perspective, so I had given a sort of a very small session in the alumni meet recently, and it was a 15-20 minute, I would say more of a conversation. So I thought why not extend it and give a sort of a little broader perspective of what are the opportunities for the MSME, how the pharma market has been, how it is shaping up, what are the strategic shifts. This is what I thought I will share. And a lot of the views I share here, some of the presentation content could have been picked up, and a lot of it are my own views. They may be not absolutely I would say the one and only viewpoint. I think if there are difference of views, please talk about it openly. I wanted to make it as interactive as possible. So that's the whole purpose of this, so that I would also enrich from interacting with you all. So with this, I will move on to sharing my screen, so that I made a small presentation which will not limit it to, because there is a sort of I would say broad spectrum of people from different disciplines. Is my audio clear?
Yes, Damu, it's very clear. You can go ahead.
So what I have done is I have also started off with a brief background about what are the different types of drugs, what are the different types of companies which are available, so that then probably will bring in a lot of context and understanding, and then it would also help you in probably understanding where the real potential is, what are the areas where India is strong in. So I start off with some basics. We will I would say move over that very faster. So is my screen visible to all?
Yes, Damu. You can probably put it on full screen mode.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are the broad themes I will be covering is, as I told you, types of pharmaceuticals. When we say pharmaceuticals, we talk in sort of a big broad sense. So I wanted to give you a flavor of what are the types of pharmaceuticals today, because it's almost like last 20 years, this field has evolved significantly. The type of therapies, the type of medicines have changed drastically. Second, what are the types of pharma companies? From what they do, you can classify the pharma companies into different segments. So I'll talk about that. Then briefly about the innovation value chain, life cycle of the pharma, and then Indian pharma industry, where it was probably 20-30 years back, how it evolved over the years, and what has been the strength of Indian pharma. Because Indian pharma basically today exports close to almost $17-20 billion worth of drugs and pharmaceuticals outside. But how it has come to this place is because of a sort of evolution and some inherent strength in the Indian pharma industry. So that we need to appreciate, and how we lost it over time, and how the COVID has really thrown up certain challenges, but at the same time, how it is also opening up some sort of a new opportunities, which Gopi also touched upon. and very specific to the MSME sector, what could be sort of potential opportunities is what I'm trying to cover in this whole thing. So please feel free to interrupt any point in time. Please raise your hand, or maybe the moderator can tell if there is a question. Is that fine to everyone, or is there anything which I'm missing out? Is it a sort of a broad coverage? Is it fine?
Fine, sir. You can go ahead, sir.
So when we say drugs, we anything which gives a sort of a therapeutic activity is called as a drug. So broadly, the drugs can be classified into sort of 4 large buckets. Small molecules, peptides and hormones, which are basically, I would say, medium-sized molecules, biologics, which are pretty large molecules, and then the monoclonal antibodies, which are very, very complex, very large molecules. So when we say small molecules, these molecules are actually chemical entities. So right from the aspirin to paracetamol to your statin, which we take for our blood pressure, sartans, which we take for controlling our hypertension, all these molecules come under the category of small molecules. These are mostly synthetically made. So it's a sort of a chemistry reactions which happen, and finally the active ingredient is made and then formulated depending upon whether it has to be a slow release, extended release, immediate release. Depending on that, it is formulated with excipients, and most of the lifestyle medications which we take, all of this come under the category of antibiotics. Everything come under the, I would say, classification of small molecules. Then you have another segment which is called peptides and hormones, which are basically, around 80% of our body is made up of amino acids. Excepting if you remove the fat and water from our body, most of our body is built up of amino acids. So the peptides are nothing but chains of amino acids which directly act on the system to produce different hormones and change the pathway of the functioning of the body, thereby regulating the disease activities and things like that. So these peptides and hormones, I would say, are slightly larger molecules, but they can either be synthetically made like the small molecules, or can also be made biologically using organisms or live material. So some of the common peptides which you might have seen is insulin, which is used for diabetes, vasopressin, which is generally used for anti-diuretic, which reduces your sweating, and then calcitonin, oxytocin. All these molecules are peptides and hormones. These are not very complex. These can still be manufactured synthetically and then through chemical reactions, and you can also use some sort of a biological way of building this up. Then you come to the next category, called as the biologics. So the biologics, anything which is made by, I would say, live cells, right from your bacteria to your mammals to plants, animals, anything which is coming from that is called as a biologic. So today, if you really look at the world is moving towards biologics, and the more complex antibodies itself, like when you really, when there is a disease. Now, I think this is a sort of a common thing with this COVID. We always talk about antigens, antibodies, and things like that. So what happens is, whenever there is a sort of a foreign invasion of any disease or an organism into your body, a virus or something, there is some antigens which are produced. So the antigens are being attacked by the antibodies. So now what we do is we clone these antibodies in outside living systems and then directly use them as sort of therapy activities. And these are called monoclonal antibodies, which are very, very complex in nature. So today, if you really look at, a lot of drug research is happening in the peptide, biologics, and the monoclonal antibodies area. If you really look at the top pharma companies like a Roche or a GSK, significant amount of research goes into the biologics and the MABs. They call it as anything which ends with a MAB, rituximab, adalimumab. All these things all come from the monoclonal antibody. It is the third last three letters denote monoclonal antibodies. So most of this area is where significant amount of research money is going in. I'll also talk about how it varies. Like when you say a small molecule, which is like an aspirin or something, this is the size of the molecule could be. So just to give a small comparison, if you compare it to a cycle, the amino acid would be a sort of a bike. A small biologic would be the size of a car. And the monoclonal antibody, which is on the right side, could be a large biologic, which would be the size of a jet plane. So that is the size of, I would say, size difference of the molecules. And as you move from the small molecule to the large molecule, the degree of complexity in terms of its analysis, prescription, its, I would say, preparation, synthesis, everything becomes more and more complex. So looking into all of this, if you really look at what are the big category differences between the small and large molecule is, the small molecules are very low molecular weight, mostly a single atom or single molecule of maybe around 20 to 40 atoms. But then when the biologics goes, it goes as high as 30,000, 40,000 atoms. The structure of a small molecule, it's very, very easy to analyze. You have your HPLC, which we call it as a high performance liquid chromatography. We inject it in that, you get a sort of a very clear assay of how much percentage purity it is, what are the, it's very, very easy to characterize, structurize and analyze. But when it comes to biologics, it's very, very complex. So you can't define an exact manufacturing process because it's produced in living cells. So how they really interact between each other, how the whole, I would say, tissue responds to that conditions, all this varies significantly. So it's a sort of a very, very complex process. Then when you talk about modifications, a small molecule can be easily modified. You can attach a functional group, you can attach another chemistry group to it, modify the activity quickly, but those are all not practically possible in biologics. Even in the manufacturing, I talked about it, it's a living cell culture in the biologics, so it's very, very difficult because just like our body is not able to take up temperature fluctuations, heat fluctuations and all those stuff, similarly the manufacturing conditions also have to be really, really precise in terms of temperature, pH, pressure and all those things, and it is impractical. Two biologics made at two different countries, though the process will remain same, will not be identical. So you can have an identical copy, but it will not be matching, I would say, analysis to analysis. There would be definitely some variations, though their therapeutic activity, their functioning will be similar. It will not be an identical copy. Then the next one is characterization. It's very, very easy to analyze and characterize, but when it comes to biologic, and that is the very reason we say, like when we have a small molecule drug, once the, I would say, patent period is over, lot of other players come into the small molecule area. These molecules are called generics, so which are absolutely identical copies of the original innovation drug. But when it comes to biologics, we don't call it as generics, we call it as biosimilars, because it is not going to be exactly identical. It is going to be similar in terms of therapeutic activity. It is going to have, I would say, similar production processes, but it will not be absolutely like to like. And then it comes to, in terms of stability, I think the small molecule drugs are robust and stable, but then the biologics are very, very unstable, sensitive to external conditions, because finally they are proteins or antibodies directly injected into the system. And in terms of even the prescriptions, most of the biologics come under the injectable category, whereas the stable can be a mix of patches, oral drugs, intravenous injectables, everything can be there when it comes to small molecule drugs. And most of the biologics are immunogenic. As we are putting in antibodies directly into the system, they are immunogenic in nature, which means they will solicit the immune response from the body. So that is the very reason most of the biologics are there for autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis, cancer. So these are the general treatments for which the biologics are used. Any doubts up till here? So this is just to give a flavor of what are the different types of, I would say, molecules available for treatments. Now going to the next type of companies, what are the different types of companies? Broadly, I classified this as 3 types of companies. One is the innovators, second is the generics, and third is the CRDMOs, which is full form is contract research, development, manufacturing organizations. That's what I call it as. So when it comes to the innovators, some of the examples are, I would say even within the innovators, there are 2 broad sects. One would be the big pharma. Big pharma means they are large companies which have huge, I would say, revenues in terms of billions of dollars, and then they have a huge pipeline of drugs which are there, which is being researched for unmet medical needs. So some of the companies which come under that classification, I would say GSK, Roche, Eli Lilly, Novartis, all these companies come under that segment. Then you have smaller companies, which are basically people who have worked in this big pharma, but who are all very innovative. They could be biologists, they could be, I would say, pharmacologists who have come out of those companies with some sort of entrepreneurial mindset. So few of the people join together and start organizations which are mostly PE-funded organizations. In the US, though it has nothing to do with biotechnology, they are called as the biotechs. It's not that they work on small molecules also, which are chemical in nature, but the general name that is given to them is the biotechs. So they are generally venture capital funded or PE funded. They may be working on at best 1 or 2 molecules, and their entire, I would say, funding goes into paying their salaries and promoting their research. And once it comes to some shape, I think then probably the big pharma or someone who has got a sort of a huge backing of funds buys out that company and then takes it through the clinical trials. And that's when they get the windfall gain. If there is a good success, they get the windfall gain in those molecules. Then you have a group of companies which are called as generics, which means these companies do not invest in the basic research. They do still have a R&D arm, but their research is more process based. So what they do is they wait for the molecule patents to expire, and then they start doing process research, make the process more, I would say, cost effective, efficient, and then build on economies of scale, and then try to tap the market across a wider spectrum of countries, or wider range of countries, wider population, because by the time when the molecule comes out of patent, the cost drops to almost like generally to the level of 1/20th of what it used to be during the patent period. So that's what the generic companies. And within the generic companies, you'll have pure API plays. API means active pharmaceutical ingredient, which means it's a bulk drugs. And then you have the formulation companies, which also do the bulk. Either they source the bulk drugs and manufacture the formulations, or they do the API as well as the formulations. So if you again look at it, the companies like Sandoz, Cipla, Torrent, all come under the, even Dr. Reddy's, all this come under the branded formulation. There are very few companies in India who stop at the API, because today API becomes a sort of a supply chain for the formulation. So everybody wants full control of the supply chain. So that's why most of the companies which are into the branded formulation at least make the API for themselves. If not, they sell it outside. But there are very, very few companies which are pure play API manufacturers still left. Some of them are Gujarat Themis, Shilpa, Copran, companies like this. Then you have a third set of companies which are called as CRDMOs, which are basically supporting either the innovators or the generics by offering services. So what they do is they pick up services which they are probably leaders in, and then they offer it as a service to both innovators and generic companies. So within that, you can have pure play CROs, which are contract research organization, which support the innovators basically during the phase of innovation, where they help in the clinical trials, they help in animal studies, toxicology studies, and all those stuff. And some of the companies in India which classified under category or Advenus, Origin, Eurofin as a European company, but then they have a good presence in India. Then you have CDMOs and CMOs, which are pure manufacturing organizations, and then you have the CDMO organizations. So the CMO organization, the big ones are the Divi's, Piramal, so who do have great strengths in manufacturing. They pick up the molecules which are off patent or even the molecules which are in patent and then make it under a sort of a complete, I would say, agreement with the innovator or the generic player and supply it as a sort of a full contract to them. So they don't market it themselves. They work for either the innovators or the generics. Then you have companies which are slightly into the company I work for also comes under the category CDMO, where we do have a significantly large R&D pool strength, which works on the development of the new molecules, which is, we work for the innovators, we work with all the top 10 big pharma like GSK, Lilly, Novartis, all of them we work with. So we do research for them, help them through the medicinal chemistry process and all this stuff, and supply drugs on a sort of a contract basis to them. So these are the type of areas. So very clearly, if you really look at what is the potential for Indian companies, like if you really look at, you're able to see my cursor as well, please?
Yes, Damu, we can.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this area, I think the innovation space, I think today, whether Indian companies are there are a few Indian companies which attempted a lot of innovation in these areas. Some of the leaders in this are probably companies like BRL, which came very close to inventing a drug. It failed in the phase 3 clinical. Then Glenmark had some reasonable success, and then companies like Lupin, Ranbaxy also have had their shots in this. But then still, is the India prime time ready for innovation? I think it is a sort of a high gestation game. I have a slide which is covering that, why Indian companies have not been successful there. So this space, I would not say there's a space or a strength area for Indian companies. What India can do is, we are very good in this generic space. We are very good in the CDMO space, and these are the two areas we should focus on, at least for the short term, as we build the strengths for the future. So this is the summary. Any queries, any questions till this time?
No questions, sir. You can go ahead, sir.
So when it comes to innovation, why the innovation space is so complex? If you really look at, these are medicines which are for the unmet medical needs. That means either I improve the quality of medication for an existing medical need, or there is a medical need which has not been addressed so far, and so I work on a molecule which is going to help treat that unmet medical need. So it's a very, very complex teamwork. So it's not about chemistry, it's not about biology. You need a blend of biology, which means it's molecular biology, it's cellular biology. You need pharmacologists, you need toxicologists, and then you need the chemistry to manufacture the molecule. So you need a sort of a very complex team. And India traditionally, though it has got significant strength in chemistry and to some extent in pharmacology, I think the India's strengths in biology has to improve significantly. So today we are not in that stage. We are able to compete with probably Europe or the West, wherein we have a significant strength in biology. We can do segments of biological work, but nothing which can probably encompass a sort of a huge, complete drug discovery platform. Then it's a sort of a high risk, high reward game. In the next slide, I'll cover how much of money goes into developing a single successful molecule. And it has got long gestation periods. So today, in olden days, I think it used to take 10 years to invent a drug. I think today with the sort of technology and the need for all this, I think we have been able to shrink, the industry has been able to shrink this chain to somewhere close to around 6 to 7 years. But still, it's a sort of a huge long gestation. So I don't think it is a sort of a area for the MSME or the small time entrepreneur. I I think that is something which probably we'll have to look at it as a long-term strategy. It needs significant investment in R&D in terms of expertise, people, and all those stuff. And also it has to be PE funded. So one thing which at least has not very evolved in India is the funding. So though there are some pockets of funds flowing into the IT and the IT related services, but then for a sort of a basic science or something like that, whether Indian PE space has become so mature, I have my doubts. And then today, as I told you, only very few large Indian pharma companies can attempt on the drug innovation. None has been successful so far. But then even for attempting it, the amount of money and time it sucks in and the type of people we need, I think very few Indian companies have been able to cross that barrier. Now I'll come to why still the innovation is so prohibitive. When we talk about sort of a drug discovery cycle, this is the time cycle. So what we do is, first we pick up sort of an unmet medical need, which has not been addressed so far. And then the companies start on target identification and validation. So they arrive at some sort of a thesis that these are the type of molecules which will work for this type of disease or a medical need. And then they try to work on that theme. So they work on scores of compounds. So it's not about one. They will work on around 50 or 60 compounds, each at milligram level, and they will be trying some sort of a biological experimentations to see whether it has any positive impact for the medical need. So then that is called as a hit discovery. So once you get some sort of a thing which really impacts that medical condition, that is called as a hit molecule. And then from the hit, they do a sort of a high throughput screening, and then from the hit, they narrow down to a lead, and then they optimize the lead. So this is called as early drug discovery, wherein I think it takes almost like close to 6 to 8 months. Earlier it used to take a year, but then there are a lot of screening tools and a lot of advances coming in that area, and that's what you end up with, a sort of early drug discovery. Post that, for a period of around 12 to 18 months, there is a preclinical study which is going on. So which means you inject it in rat mice, you do its drug metabolism, you do formulation optimization, bioavailability, and then finally end up with, if it all crosses those hurdles successfully, then you go ahead and file it as an investigational new drug, which is called as an IND. That's when you start owning that molecule. Then you say, this is a molecule which is my investigational new drug, and nobody has got authority to make that, or you cover it through a sort of an initial patent. In that process itself, you lose close to almost like 2 years. And then your real chemical formulation is done. And this is going to be a sort of extremely intense, high cost phase, wherein you are recruiting volunteers. So you take healthy volunteers, human trials. This is when the human trials start. Today, all of us will be talking about some people getting injected with the new vaccines and things like that. All these are part of the human trials. And this goes in 3 phases. Phase 1, which is a healthy volunteer, and then phase 2 and 3, which is a patient population study. And this is, you have to keep control of the complete records of the patient, monitor their, I would say, health records, constantly engage with them, and it is a sort of a high intense and high cost work. And for which you need to produce the drug, formulate the drug, and then administer and also monitor the people for a period. So this generally goes minimum for almost like 3.5 to 4 years. And the success rate in this, I'll come to that in the next slide. And then post that, you get your approval and then submit it to an FDA who looks at it from both cost and commercial aspects. If your therapy is not significantly providing any advantage over the existing drugs, then probably they may not, for the incremental cost which is you are going to charge. So then the FDA may reject the application. So finally, it has to be both commercially as well as therapeutically much better than the existing drugs. And then you should also be aware that when you are doing this research, there could be parallelly 10 other companies working on similar things. And suppose if your competitor's drug becomes more, I would say, efficient and effective, So all your work you've done over the last 5-6 years is gone. And then you have a life cycle management, which is tracking the market and then any adverse impact. So this is the complexity of the drug discovery cycle and the amount of money which goes in. Let's say, for example, I start with a target validation. Okay, so if I have around 24 target validation candidates or programs, I finally end up with one program which could be a successful molecule. So this is the type of attrition. So across every phase, you have 49% of the drugs falling off after the target validation. Again, 31% falling off in the next levels. Like that, progressively molecules fall off either because of efficacy or because of cost considerations or because of toxicity. So in this duration, if you really look at the duration here is all much, much longer. This is probably a little older slide where the duration is close to around 9 years. Now, I think companies have been able to shrink it to 6 to 7 years. So, and then the amount of costs you see, the costs which go into this is almost like, if you really look at almost like you total all of them, it's close to $1 billion which you spend to get one successful drug. It may not be spent by the same company, but then overall as a pharma fraternity, you spend around $1 billion and then you get one successful molecule. And all this have to be finally booked onto that molecule. Companies have to recover the costs, and that's why sometimes drugs which are under patent are obscenely costly. Then some of the emerging trends, if you really look at, I think this is a 2009-11 old presentation, but the scenario has not changed substantially. If you really look at, though there has been a lot of talk about biologics, proteins, DNA and all those stuff, still small molecules, which is the chemical synthesis, is close to around 45 to 50% of the overall number of molecules which are being invented or discovered. So, which means still there is significant potential. We need not get unduly concerned that everything is moving to biologics. So, basic chemistry skill set is going to really come in handy if we keep our focus very, I would say, razor sharp, and then see what are our strengths and then work on to the strengths. So, there is significant potential for the Indian companies and the small entrepreneurs, because with all of this noise around biologics and things like that, I don't think it has completely, it might have taken over in terms of value. Though there are only, if you really look at the peptide, monoclonal antibody and the protein, this is the segment which is the biologics, which is close to around 25%. Though in terms of numbers of drugs, it is close to around 25%. In terms of value, it could be occupying almost like 60% of the whole revenues. But still, I think for a market like India, or I think a 40% drug market itself is a significantly large pool to tap in. So we have not reached the critical pace to say, I am not able to grow. So I think still there is enough potential, a lot of untapped markets are available. I think there is good potential for Indian companies. So this also gives you a sort of a flavor of up to 2017, if you really look at, there were only 12 biologics molecules against 34 molecules, which were the small molecules. All the small molecules are basic, I would say, typically like a brick and mortar type of plants is where it is manufactured. Finally, you need raw materials, you need reactors, you need filtration systems, you need chemistry, R&D scientists, and this is where it is all coming from. Most of the small molecules. Then we will touch upon broadly the pharma value chain to understand what is the area where we should be concentrating. So if you break the pharma value chain, you have raw material manufacturers, which are basically the basic chemicals and the early intermediates. So which means when I say basic chemicals, it's not the solvents like what Ananda Kumar manufactures, like toluene, hexanes and things like that, but they are the next level derivatives of the basic chemicals, which could be amino compound or sort of a chlorobenzene, these type of things, which goes into multiple building blocks of intermediates which are used for pharma applications. They may be going to significantly different industries as well, but for the pharma market, these are the basic, I would say, building blocks. The next ones are the early intermediates, because in all this, the pharma industry, what happens is it's a highly regulated industry. Which means there are FDAs, which is the Food and Drug Administration of the different countries covering this, I would say, regulations. Though we work very closely with the European Union and the FDA, most of the Indian companies, I think there are FDAs in every state, which are also actually equally having very stringent guidelines. Only thing their implementations are little lax, but I think one of my colleagues used to say, if you follow, I would say, the Indian FDA of any state, I think we will never have any problems with any of the FDAs. That level of stringency is what is built into the Indian, they call it as the Schedule M, which is built into the Schedule M is so tight. It picks up all the, I would say, the best aspects of most of the, I would say, FDA guidelines and puts it inside. Only thing, the implementation is little lax. Then you have the next set of two verticals, which are basically controlled by the pharma companies, which are the registered intermediates. Here, I would say, the going gets little tighter, because you have to stick to a lot of quality rules and regulations. You should have huge amount of bookkeeping, documentation exercises, and then the good manufacturing practices, where it becomes little complex. And the segments there, what are get manufactured, or the registered intermediates, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and the excipients. Excipients are nothing but what technically get added to the, I would say, the active ingredients to make it a sort of a proper tablet, which will not crumble or which will not easily disintegrate into your body system. It will be available for an extended release and all those things. So a lot of, I would say, docile components are added to the active ingredient to make it a proper tablet which will function or dissolve in the pattern it is expected to. Then you have the pharmaceutical companies which are making the tablets, ointments, injectables, IV fluids, patches, all these things. And then you have the drug distribution, logistics companies, which can be direct distributors, retail agencies, marketing companies. And then the consumers of this, which can be hospitals, insurance, and all of us in the government as well. So this is the overall pharma cycle value chain. And now I would go on to probably how the Indian industry has evolved and where we are today and how we want to maneuver this over time. I think somewhere in, this is a famous statement made by earlier Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. She observed in one of the Geneva Convention that affluent societies are spending vast sums of money, understandably, on the search of new products and processes to alleviate suffering and to prolong life. In the process, drug manufacture has become a powerful industry. My idea of a better ordered world is one in which medical discoveries will be free of patents and there will be no profiteering from life or death. So very profound statement. She made this in 81, but this was the thought process which went into her deciding that in 1970, India said that it will honor only process patents and not product patents. And that was a time she threw out most of the multinationals out of India, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis, and most of the other companies, unless otherwise they allow the medicines which are under patent to be manufactured in India. So she threw all of them out. And that was a big change for the Indian pharma industry. Till that time, even a paracetamol was costing probably a rupee or two. And which times I think people were dying without good medicines being available. Nobody could afford medicine, and that's why I would say the life expectancy was very low. So she said, and then she tied up with she opened up several CSIR institutes like IICT in Hyderabad, NIPER, Indian drugs and pharmaceuticals with Russian collaboration to support drug research and manufacture. And she chose, I think fortunately, Hyderabad became the hub for all this activity. And this continued from 1970s to the late 90s. That is a period which I would say was a golden period for Indian pharma industry. What happened during that period is India's chemistry skill set vastly improved because there were a lot of graduates which were coming. They were taking up doctorate programs in companies like IICT, UDCT, NIPER, where it was pharmaceutical research. And they were all getting exposed to various, I would say, even foreign opportunities, went abroad, learned, came back, exchange programs. I think significant growth happened during this period. And companies like Standard Organics, which is no more existent, Dr. Reddy's, Ranbaxy, Cipla, all this thrived in this period. So the relaxed patent regime helped them to develop cost-effective routes. They were not worried about the end molecule patent. So they could, as long as they were not infringing in the process route, they were free to manufacture the drug. So all these companies started reverse engineering. Reverse engineering means not infringing the patent and then working out an alternate mechanism or a chemistry route for making the same end product. So by doing this, all these companies became very good in, I would say, basic process research, and also a lot of the costs of many medicines came down substantially through the reverse engineering. And we also had an advantage of low cost labor and then low cost capital, the capital investments for the same size of a plant being much lower. All this benefited Indian companies. And then India became a sort of, over the next 2 decades, I think India became a sort of a net exporter of bulk drugs and intermediates. Not a net exporter, they started exporting significantly to the less regulated and regulated markets. At that time, I think, if I remember right, I think US FDA and the EU regulations were not very well understood by these companies. So they started exporting basically to the LATAM and the less regulated markets. Then by the 90s, I think people started understanding, the companies like Lupin, Dr. Reddy's, Ranbaxy, they started understanding the complexity of this quality guidelines. And by the late 90s, I think India was a major supplier to US and Europe. Several companies, so for every bulk drug which you have to export, you have to file something called as a drug master application. They call it as a DMF. So they started filing DMFs for the active pharmaceutical ingredients and they started exporting to the regulated markets. So audits started happening, the FDA, the European Union, and all these agencies started auditing Indian companies. And I think they had a sort of a very, very successful export revenues. But then in 1997 or 98, I think Dr. Reddy's was one of the, there were a few companies which made bold attempts to challenge the patents. So when there were patents, the patent is a sort of a huge, I would say, cover for most of the activities, right from the therapeutic category to a process to everything. It covers, the patent covers everything. So a few bold moves were taken up, and then Dr. Reddy's was successful in getting a sort of a para 4 filing, which is actually challenging the patent and saying that this patent is not valid. And they were very successful in doing that. And they got a competing market for a product called fluoxetine. And within that one molecule, they made close to almost like, if I'm right, 2,500 crores over the next 2 years as revenues. So this is what is a company which built Reddy's. So a lot of companies started moving into this sort of a litigative approach, and this changed the approach of the pharma industry. So people were only focusing on regulated markets, wanting to tap basically US and Europe, where the realizations were much higher for the bulk drug, and they started concentrating. And in the process, what happened is they missed out the basics. So all the companies, if you would have joined a pharma company somewhere in the late 90s, the only mantra was, this year I have to file 15 DMF. This year I have to file 20 DMF. This should be a race between most of the companies. You go to a Dr. Reddy's, Ranbaxy, Orchid. This will be the only discussion in R&D, nothing else. So what happened is there was a race to add more and more DMFs. The quality of development, the process development, which was India's strength, took a hit. Because you are getting very shorter time for development. So all these companies, what they were doing whatever process work, they did the first 100 kilos and then put all the documents together and submitted a drug master file. So then what happened? They did not have time to do a 10-step chemistry. So what they did, they bought the intermediates from China. So the 5th step intermediate, which was, again, if you go to the value chain, I talked about the non-registered intermediates and few registered intermediates. So they used to buy that from China, do the last 2-3 stages, and then make the drug master file and then file it to the US. So this helped the pharma companies between probably, I would say, the 2000s to 2010. A lot of companies benefited, but what was happening, slowly the basics got lost. So China was slowly capturing your entire, I would say, supply chain without companies realizing it. To add to the views, what happened, the government complicated it further. You had, see, this pharma market is not like a sort of a petrochemical or a large chemical industry where you start with the product in mind and then you do it completely eternally. So you need fast changes. So today I will be making a product X. So tomorrow the demand for that product may go down or somebody else might have become more efficient. So my market will be down. So I have to use the same plant to make it Y. Tomorrow Z. Or I will put up a multi-purpose plant which will give X or Y or Z at any point in time. Our pollution control systems and things like that were not allowing this. Even today, it doesn't allow that flexibility. Every time I have to change a product, I have to sit before the pollution control board and get a clearance, and which doesn't work because they make only 2 times in a month, and then I have to make the molecule tomorrow. So these type of stricter environmental controls without the government support system. Because when you are an MSME and you are generating around 10 or 15,000 liters of effluent, you can't put a huge effluent treatment plant on your own. So all you need is a sort of a common effluent treatment plant. Many places these support systems were not available. So India started concentrating only on the final API and dosage forms, and slowly they moved from the API to the formulation. So they started filing ANDAs, which are abbreviated new drug applications, which are copycats of the original, I would say, innovator's molecule, which is out of patent. So they started focusing on this, and China was slowly and steadily gathering and gaining on the market share of your intermediates and supply chain. And this is what, and China even went overboard. They started pharma parks and started inviting a lot of European and US pharma companies to set up shop. When India was supplying to the US, those guys, what they did, they started inviting those companies, gave them huge land free, huge concessions in power. And if they provide employment to few people, they were giving so much of benefits that most of the companies found it worthwhile to shift their manufacturing facilities to China. So they took control of the supply chain. They also got a good expertise, European and US expertise for making pharmaceuticals in their own country. So this is what they did, and completely slowly, during probably the late 90s, India had great strengths in the antibiotic market and cephalosporin market. So companies like, I would say, Lupin, Ranbaxy, JK setup, Spig Pharma, all these companies had set up huge facilities. Over the next 5 years, everything was wiped out because they dumped penicillin G at such low cost from China. None of these companies could even stand that pressure of the pen G. Today, if you really look at 70-80% of the antibiotics are being imported from China. That's where we are. But traditionally, if you look at India, had great strengths there. So the economies of scale also benefited the Indian companies because they were not only supplying for the Indian market and the less regulated, it was also supplying to all the European companies which have set up shop in China. So they were also feeding to that. So you have a large volume game which was at play, aided by government subsidies. So the Chinese market completely took over the supply chain of India. And this is what happened between 2000 to 2010, where India had actually lost on great amount of strengths which had slowly surrendered to the Chinese. And then the last 10 years has been, I would not say it's 10 years, around 7-8 years has been really tough for the pharma industry, because the number of patents which are expiring is also going down. There is a patent cliff. Nowadays, you don't have a blockbuster like a paracetamol or atorvastatin, which sold almost like $7 billion. You don't have blockbusters like this, because most of the lifestyle medication has all been conquered. Now we know how to live with the hypertension. As long as you take your medicines regularly, as long as you exercise regularly, you are comfortable to live with the hypertension. Similarly, diabetes. Similarly, I think even the mild, I would say, issues related to your cardiac issues and things like that. The whole lifestyle thing has been conquered. So now what is the issue is the cancer, because of the longevity getting increased, I would say central nervous system, where you have problems like depression, I would say psychosis, and a lot of orphan drugs which only affect a sort of a small segment of people, for which I think it is not worth spending so much of research on treating that, because it doesn't affect the entire world. It affects only a small sects of population. These are called orphan drugs, but that is an area where I think nobody has a medication and the people are left to suffer. So these are the only pockets where research is happening. Today, if you look at 10 drugs, almost like 5 or 6 will be for oncology, which is cancer. Maybe around 3-4 for, I would say, the central nervous system, and maybe 1 or 2 orphan drugs. And that's what would be. There is no more antibiotic research. There is no more, I would say, blood pressure, medication, all that is, you have to just mix and match what is available in the market, and you are able to handle it effectively. So what happened as the patents started reducing and then the biologics started taking more research activity, the generic space for the small molecule has become very, very competitive. So more and more players, and the US retailers. See, the US and the European market work very differently. Across the entire US, I think you have only 3 or 4 companies doing the distribution. So that's how it is. And so there is no scope for reducing costs, because all the key ingredients are coming from China. So this is what we ended up with. And finally, the COVID scenario exposed it very, very clearly. When we had the attacks of COVID and we had supplies from China getting disrupted, you could see there was a situation where we couldn't get normal antibiotics in the medical shop. So within around 1 month, the antibiotic, I would say, shelf space disappeared. The raw materials, 70-80% of the raw materials are from India, from China. Antibiotic space is as high as 90%. In many cases, it is all single sourced. If that company shuts down, you don't have an input. So that is the scenario which got exposed during the COVID. But the underlying thing is, I think India has still some strengths. If we move our cards very well, I think we can probably regain the past glory. So I think we have the maximum number of FDA approved units outside of the US compared to any country. You have the second highest share of new drug applications, abbreviated new drug applications, which is for the generic, I would say, patent expired molecules, next only to the US. So other than US, we are the second largest. We export close to around 18 billion worth of drugs to US and Europe. We have now, at least with the bilateral trade between US and India, is moving slowly more towards US and Europe. And there is a general resentment against China. So countries are looking to diversify, I would say, supply chains across geographies. If they are not going to move out of China also, what they would do is, I think they would definitely balance their risk by splitting the supply chain across 2 different geographies. And then there is a huge newer market, like Japan is opening up. You have Africa, which is now growing. You have a lot of Latin American countries which are also growing. So I think you have a lot of new market potential also is available to Indian companies. So what India needs to do is, we have to go back to basics, what we are good at, the government also should support with, I would say, back the pharma zones, which will be focusing towards MSMEs. Because what we find is, it's not required that you always have a sort of a very, very large pharma company. If there are smaller entrepreneurs who are able to pick up one or two drugs and do a development, a bunch of chemists, engineers together, the pharma is, one good thing about pharma is it is not heavily capital intensive. It is mainly working capital intensive. So it's not capital cost intensive. So they should start working on these type of pharma focus, where all the auxiliaries like your boiler, utilities will all be supplied at cost. So then I think this is an area where I think a lot of MSMEs can flourish. The companies like building block companies like Atul, Aarti, Vinati. I think if you had, I don't know how many of you follow the share markets. If you really look at all these companies, the Atul, Aarti, Vinati and all are there at lifetime highs in such a sort of a depressed sentiment. All of these companies have grown almost like minimum twofold in this 5 or 6 months. Like Atul, if you really look at the share price was close to around 3,500, 4,000 bucks a share. Now it is around 6,200. Aarti has touched 1,000 from almost like 550, 400 levels. Vinati also. So all these companies which are making basic building blocks, which has got huge, I think they are the bridge between the petrochemical, inorganic chemicals to the fine chemicals. That is where the area where they concentrate, and these companies are going to hugely benefit if they move their cards properly. I think these companies should look at capacity expansion, concentrate in the pharma market, look at values there. I think it's going to be, the sky is the limit for these companies. And then the larger pharma companies should also have some sort of a, I would say, patriotic look, because rather than sourcing their raw materials from China, they should start giving those opportunities to backward integrate with Indian suppliers, even if it would be probably a marginal hit on their profitability. So this is something which the government should help by doing the anti-dumping duty on certain chemicals. They have to analyze the list of chemicals which are coming into the pharma segment and then apply some sort of anti-dumping duty for certain chemicals which are not helping the, I would say, the local pharma sector to grow. And then the bigger companies like the Lupins, Ranbaxys of the world of India should probably invest in technology, because this, again, even this is not going to be long lasting. So finally we need to compete in a sort of an open world with the best in the world. So I think we have to start focusing on technology investments, and you should start second sourcing all the raw materials and intermediates. So if you are sourcing from one place, one geography, one company, I think the best way is to have somebody, a small timer, which is near adjacent to you, develop him, provide him the skill set, and then slowly develop him as your supplier. And that is the way, I think in a very, very small way, Sai has started this initiative, because we work with a lot of new chemicals all the time, because we are working on research area. We don't have fixed, all our products are new. So I think we work with smaller companies like this. We provide them the chemistry skill set, help them to perform, and then we source from them. The other area which can be a good area is formulation equipment. Today, all the world-class formulation equipment, right from packaging, blister packing, all these things are imported. I think this is an area where I think I saw somebody from the robotics field, automation field, people like Nallappan. So they should look at this, and then there is a significant opportunity here. So I think where we can probably help our country to manufacture these type of formulation equipment is something which probably India needs to do. Finally, it all should be directed towards our PM's mission. I don't know whether it is Atmanirbhar India, but at least for pharma, which is healthcare, I think we should become Atmanirbhar Pharma. So that should be the sort of a focus for the Indian companies. And in this, for the CRDMOs, which is specific to our field, I think very, very clear invest in areas of manufacturing, next generation technologies, develop biology skill set. So sooner or later, this is going to be a sort of a key requirement for Indian companies. So if we don't invest in biology, I think the complete new drug arena will be lost. So this is a mistake which we should not do. We did it in the past. So we should clearly be conscious of the fact still 40% of the molecules which are being developed are peptides, hormones, biologics. I think we need to really invest in biotechnology. Though there are so many colleges offering biotechnology, I have seen over the last few years, most of the biotechnology guys either enter into the IT field or they end up with the chemical field. So still the master's education, the research orientation on the biotechs is only available in companies somewhere in probably the South Africa, the NCBI, maybe Singapore, the National University of Singapore, or only in the Europe and the West. So technically you don't have great biotechnology research happening in India. Then medicinal chemistry, where I talked about initial lead hit for the molecules, that is a area which China literally dominates. If you have 100 medicinal chemists working for the innovator companies, 70 of them will be working in China and maybe around 20 in India. So that is an area where easily we can move because it doesn't require, all it requires is a bunch of people coming together with a good lab and a good commitment, good passion. I think definitely because it's a sort of a low-hanging fruit for Indian companies. Then you have also need to invest in some sort of a protein peptide-based chemistries, drug delivery systems, and then research and training. So this is the overall areas for the CRDMOs, and coming very specifically to most of you people where you can influence. Definitely, I think chemical sourcing and trading. So today getting some sort of a software which will work on the building blocks, the typical chemistries, how we can do some sort of a data analytics, how do we track the right companies, pricing structure, reliable sources, anywhere in the globe. Because today what happens is, let's say for example, I need a new drug, I go and tell my sourcing guy and he immediately rushes to 4 or 5 companies which is in China, and then gets the raw material for me. But what we should do is, we should look at what are the strengths companies have, which chemistries the companies are good at. Sometimes maybe your guy next door may be the most efficient in that type of a chemistry, but we don't even reach out to him. Similarly, there are companies in Europe which are very good because of the volumes of scale. So how do we really do reliable sourcing, trading, then supply chain support systems, which is what I bundled it together. Equipment fabrication. So this area is going to see substantial capital investments. So equipment fabrication, whoever has got mechanical engineering industry and fabrication and things like that, this is a huge potential. I don't know how many of you know a company called Gujarat Machinery Manufacturers. It's called as GMM Fodler, which has a tie-up with Fodler of US. It's a company which makes glass line reactors. Today, this company has become almost like a monopoly in India. So the share price of GMM has shot up from $800 to $6,000 in the last 6 months. So that is the sort of potential which is exploding. In fact, they have gone back and bought out the parent itself. The subsidiary company has bought the parent back. So these are the type of potentials which are available in the fabrication space. If you have a sort of a niche, then I think Gopi can, all the solvent, I would say pharma manufacture involves lots of solvents. To be very cost effective, unless otherwise you recover your solvents and recycle, you are not going to be cost competitive when you are making very mundane initial raw material. So that is an area which has been India's strength. Today we have lost it. I think we should get that, because it not only serves to control your costs, but then finally the treatment costs, the pollution which it creates. So that is all going to be really minimized if you work on solvent recovery. I think there are a lot of significant advantages coming in. So if all the solvents are collected, segregated, grouped, and then you are putting up larger systems which can handle this together as a single company, I think it makes a lot of sense. Second is wealth from waste. I think this is one area wherein the pharma industry uses a lot of materials which use iodine, bromine, which are very, very potassium, which are all very expensive inorganic chemicals, but they finally end up in a sort of a mix as a salt, where it is treated by evaporation, which is costly, and then ends up in a landfill. So if companies start working with I would say larger companies, find out such streams, collect them at a cost, and they are able to get. In fact, in one of my last projects, when I was working as a small engineer in Max India in Mysore, there was a huge loads of bromine which was coming. A company which got two streams from our own company, which was a potassium-based stream and a bromide-based stream. They coupled it together. They did some purification, and they were able to isolate potassium bromide salt for the photography industry. And he was just buying waste from us at 1 rupee and selling that at probably around 60-80 bucks. And every month we used to have close to almost like 100 tons of that salt. So this is what is probably some of the areas where I think MSMEs can focus. Fine chemical manufacture, if there are some entrepreneurial this thing, I can also help them, guide them, what probably at least with basic knowledge from my side, I can at least put you to the right folks. Automation and mechanization. Somebody was there in the robotics field. I think this is a huge area with this COVID and things like that. I think we are going to see lesser and lesser manpower availability. The migrant workforce is declining. So this is an area where if you are able to mechanize and automate most of your activities, it would be a great change. Medicinal chemistry I talked about. Industrial refrigeration, integrators. Today, most of these compressors and all are made by the Kirloskar, Chicago Pneumatic and all these companies, but then there are very few integrators because this is an energy intense field. So I think this is another potential area, data analytics and then construction management. So these are the significant potentials available for the MSME industry. People should look at it. And if anybody has any queries, just do let me know. Maybe I may not have the answers for everything, but then I can at least guide you to the right people, help you to get the right connects. So that's it from my side. So I think I took more time than what was allotted, but then I think you people had a fruitful session.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Damu. That was indeed a wonderful presentation, and it was quite mesmerizing to all of us. There's absolute pin drop silence today in hearing each one of your areas that you covered, and the art of giving out the perspective about this industry, starting from the basics. You took us through a long journey all the way up to what is available as an opportunity. It was quite mesmerizing, especially when you touched upon the value chain, the life cycle, about the Indian pharma industry, how it has been holding its strength through the process route. And we are all sure that we will be regaining the past glory very soon. And with people like yourself at the helm of different companies, we as Annamalayans are really, really proud that so many of our alumni are holding excellent positions to drive this industry forward. And it was a great eye-opener, and we also kind of thank you for opening up and telling our members that you are willing to give your wisdom and advice when they want to pursue any opportunity in this industry. With this, I request our committee member Sivaraman to please go ahead moderating the Q&A, and I am sure a lot of people will have several questions to ask. Over to Shiva.
Tariq, before that, 1 minute, huh?
Hello?
Yes, Gopi.
Yeah. Only one input I want to give here. Damodharan, you were just mentioning about GMM.
Yeah.
The director of GMM is here today, Manisha. Manish, can you just introduce yourself? Manisha.
I saw Ashok Pillai. I don't know. I'm not sure.
No, Ashok Pillai is there, and Manisha is the director of sales and operations there in GMM. He has muted himself. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Tariq sir. Let me moderate the question one by one. The first question is by our Coimbatore member, Mr. Sri Kumar. Why drugs are mostly sold in product name rather than generic name, which cost less in the stores?
Pardon? I didn't get you.
Yeah, the question I repeat, sir. Why drugs are mostly sold in product name rather than generic name, which cost less in the stores?
No, it is not about, see, what happens is, let's say, for example, the molecule is generic. So each company makes its own formulation and it has to brand it. So it gives a name which is very close to the generic name. Let's say, for example, have a generic name. If you really look at the brand name also, it will be somewhere capturing the essence of the generic name. Now, depending on their market, I think a company may be selling X amount of product. Another company may be making 10x amount of the same product because their brand is more popular. So what happens is they will have a greater sourcing efficiency and they will have advantage of cost. They may be able to sell it at a lower price. But then if your doctor prescribes, I think what everybody should do as learned people, I think if you are able to really get into a lot of applications are there, if you are really sourcing, there will be lists of companies and their equivalents. Buying an equivalent, you have to be little careful because there will be extended release, slow release and things like that. You have to literally look at what is like to like. And if you are buying from an equally quality conscious company, if it is available at a lower price, I think we should take that extra pain and then even educate people as much as possible. I think sometimes you get the same formulation for 10 rupees and 60 rupees. So I think we should definitely not have this amount of disparity, and this is basically because of the branding. And sometimes I think the doctor, the logistics network also is behind this sort of a drug price variation. I think we all should probably be a little more conscious about the fact, as long as it is built to good quality systems and buying from a decent company, I think we should go ahead and buy an alternate which is available.
Thank you, sir. There is another question from Mr. Sri Kumar. Is the world drug manufacturers are creating their own clinical standards for the drugs to be distributed in volumes, thereby making every normal person to become a patient for one of the health imbalances?
This is definitely better answered by a doctor, but somebody who wants to be the, have more knowledge about it, I think they should listen to Dr. Hegde, who is, a lot of his speeches are there available in the YouTube. I think most of the, I would say the industry operates by standards of standard deviation, which means they prescribe, they take a sort of a BP of the low BP and the high BP, put a band and then look at a standard deviation model and say this is the sort of optimal blood pressure for a person, and then whichever is higher or lower they start treating it, and that's the way the whole industry has evolved. But I think what he says is everybody has got a sort of inherent pressure mechanics applied. Then they should listen to a lot of these videos, and then I'm not an expert to comment on that, but yes, I think there can be better prudence there.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Next question is from Mr. G.S. Viswanathan. Two questions from him. What will be the growth of nutraceuticals? Second question is it said that nanotechnology will reduce the quantity of drugs that will be needed? Will the bulk drug manufacturers be affected?
Yeah, see, nutraceuticals is almost like I look at it with a lot of, I would say, this impacts of this COVID and things like that. I think the nutrition as an area is gaining immense attention. India has got good strengths in nutraceuticals because one, it is also a sort of a batch process industry, and then you have good amount of chemistry and natural product blend and things like that, which is both India's strengths. I think definitely we should leverage this, and this market is going to see substantial growth. On nanotechnology, probably you can leave his email ID and things like that. If I get a little more, I'm not an expert whether it will have an impact on, it's an ongoing field, but whether it will have an impact on the current medication and the bulk drug volumes, I'm not an expert. I can probably check and revert back with some experts.
Thank you, sir. The next question is from Balaji Lognathan. In spite of automation and robotic systems available for pharma factories, is manual intervention still happening in companies? Are they affecting production and quality? If so, what steps are being taken by pharma companies?
I think automation and mechanization has not really caught up with the pharma industry in the way it should have been. So today, if you look at many of the plants, almost like 80% to 90% of the plants in India will not be automated, even the utility side of it. Very, very few companies automate their plants, even the big ones I'm talking about. So let's say, for example, even if you take a company like ours, which works with Western customers, all the plants which we put up after 2012 are automated, fully automated, PLC automated. The plants which were put up before are not. So I think there is significant potential in automation and mechanization. And then when you talk about doing routine tasks like charging or something like that, I don't think we use anywhere close to even a sort of a power tool for lifting and things like that. I think that factor, the penetration levels are substantially low. I will slightly vary from the comments. I think the penetration levels are abysmally low, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, sir. This was a comment question from Mr. Chokaya and Mr. Mahendra Kumar. So I will read out Mr. Mahendra Kumar question, which is common to both of them. Can you elaborate little more on the opportunities available in data analytics and AR/VR training space?
Right. Coming to data analytics, what happens is, since we operate on, I would say, batch industry, batch plants, and most of it are highly working capital intensive. Sometimes a batch which we run will be close to probably $500,000. So, or sometimes maybe at least $100,000, $200,000. So, which means even a yield fluctuation of probably 5% can have huge positive or a positive impact of maybe 5% can have great amount of positive impact on profitability. So what they could do is when a batch travels over a 5-day or a 4-day period, there will be a lot of parameters, right from your agitation to your temperature, pressure, various conditions, which of it probably is having an impact from a basic chemistry viewpoint a normal person can sense and understand. But then to do a sort of a complex analytics with a huge amount of data sets, I think if they use what is that golden batch which gives me the highest yield, or the golden parameter set which gives me the highest yield, if we are able to track it, we work with few companies. We are in the very, very initial phase. Companies like Cognizant and all trying to help us in that space. But then there, if we use tools like AI and things like that, I think there can be great improvement in, I would say, efficiency of the batch industry. So this is as far as data analytics and AI usage is concerned. What was the next question on?
Next is the VR and AR training space.
I think, see, for all the training content, today most of our standard operating procedures, which is an important training tool for all the people who come into our this thing, which is also a parameter which is tracked by the FDA. So everybody has to go through some set of training and things like that. That is an area which is really a classroom session which nobody really spends time on. They scan it and then answer 4 or 5 questions. But then if you are able to make it little more intense by literally creating a sort of virtual environment where the guy goes into, let us say, a clean room, how he has to gown, how he has to operate and things like that, it can make the training really, really worthwhile, which can indirectly bring in efficiencies of operations. That's what I talked about. Does that answer his question?
Yeah, Shiva, you're on mute, Shiva.
Yeah.
It answers our questions. Thank you.
Fine. The next question is by Muthu Panirselvam. How is the capacity of quality control for all this upcoming manufacturing in India? Do India has enough labs to test these products? Any thoughts from Mr. Damu?
Yes, I think, see, most of these tests are all not very complex. These are HPLC, the routine analysis and things like that are possible. When it comes to some sort of a metal testing or a XRPD and things like that, there are a few approved labs across all of India and they have invested in these systems. And you could probably, if it is not a routine test for the MSMEs, they can always leverage those labs and get those one or two analysis done outside. But the basic tests like a moisture analysis or pH or HPLC, GC, these would have to be part of the original setup. And these equipments are now not very expensive or not prohibitively expensive. I think they can be definitely afforded by the MSMEs.
Yeah, thank you, sir. There are so many questions. So let me first consolidate the questions which are important. And if we have time, we can run up on the balance questions. The next question is from Mr. Ashok Pillai. The government recently announced incentives for production of key starting materials, biologics, and new pharma parks. How come the industry did not immediately respond, accepting the incentives and announcing their plans, or the announcements yet to come?
I think the industry is probably looking at the situation. So I really don't know whether they have. See, it's very, very short duration. Whether this response is going to come in the next 2-3 months, I have my doubts. I think definitely it is being viewed by the industry very actively. I am sure most of these companies will utilize these benefits, is what I feel. But they are also looking at, see, because what is happening is in this situation of this COVID, it is not about, it's not about the potential, there is an uncertainty. So the uncertainty has to end, because today, let's say for example, I'm in a CRO industry, I am not seeing any dip in the market, but I am seeing a sort of a shift. Because I'm not getting my patient enrollment, I'm not the big pharma are not getting their patient enrollment, they are only shifting their programs, they are not cancelling the programs. So there is a uncertainty. See, either the world moves this way or that way. If that clarity comes, I think the industry will respond immediately. But today the situation is little fluid. I think industry is taking little time to watch the developments, and I think in another 2-3 months things will be much clearer. That's my view, Mr. Ashok.
Yeah, thank you, sir. The next question is from Nagesh Kumar. Is it true that FDA does not encourage solvent recovery at third-party site and recycle in the pharma industry? If it is true, large-scale recycling facility processing similar solvents from multiple plants is ruled out.
Partly agreed. See, one, the FDA does not allow solvent recovery from outside is a complete myth. So you can't say that it just, because the FDA doesn't prescribe anything like this. It is up to the auditor to take a viewpoint. The only thing is, what it says is the quality has to be very clear. So if you are able to prove that there is no cross-contamination of drugs, right? So for that, you need to have all the specifications so clearly outlined that you are able to prove that there is no cross-contamination or cross-mixing of drugs. And preferably, if you are also having a significantly large stream, how can you collect it in a segregated way, run it as a segregated batch and bring it back? I think it is quite possible. But yes, I think as long as you have the solvent recovery adjacent to you and with close proximity, you can always have a control over it and establish a sort of a documentation system which gives them a sort of a high level of confidence. But then it need not necessarily go into the same industry. As long as you are able to make it perfectly fine and you can move it to the non-regulated steps of the same industry. Let's say, for example, I do a registered intermediate, I recover the solvent, let us say methylene chloride, and then move it to a less regulated stage, which is ahead of the filing. I think finally you have made commercial sense. So you'll have to balance it out depending on the commercial viability, FDA issues and things like that, but the FDA doesn't say no.
moving on to the next question from Uday Sane. Do you see natural vitamin business growing in India in coming future?
No clues. I'll take it. I'll probably take some help from somebody in the vitamins field. I'm not an expert in this.
Okay.
I'll revert back.
Right, sir. So I will move on to the next question from Manisha. Why pharma companies avoid new equipments, innovation and technology, giving reason of DMF?
Now the scenario is definitely changing. I think, see, what happens is once you file a DMF, it also costs time, money, because finally the DMF is not referred. The DMF gets referred in the ANDA. When I talked about the ANDA is a final file. So the ANDA is the formulation file. So in that the DMF gets quoted. So if you are not the end holder of the ANDA, you have to get permission from the ANDA guy to say that I am making this change, whether you are okay with that. If he doesn't, see, one, your company may not be ready to part away with the benefits which are coming out of it. You may not be passing it to the final, the formulator. Because of it, he doesn't see value in that, he says don't change. The other aspect is, the change is not so commercially viable to spend so much of a documentation hassle. So you need to really view the situation. If it makes commercial sense and you are able to convince the ANDA holder and you are able to see, finally nobody makes it just for free, right? I am not going to spend so many documentation or spend so much of time hours or man hours on documentation changes if I am not going to get benefited. So literally you have to play it commercially and then see how you get that approval from your end users. And that is the very reason just company says don't change. But the things are changing very fast. Even the Western companies are becoming cost conscious, and if there is good money in the table, they do it.
Thank you, sir. I think this is also an important question from Mr. Muthuvelayadam. Sir, please spell research areas in specific which are to be focused in academic institution, especially biochemical engineering.
I would say broadly, see, I'm not from that field, but I could say probably gene sequencing areas, molecular biology, cellular biology, and then medicinal chemistry, pharmacology. These areas are the areas where I think we do not have sufficient strengths, and these areas probably will help. Mainly chemistries around sugar chemistry, RNA, DNA type of, I would say, areas, peptides. These are the areas where I think a lot of research should go in. No, you are on mute. Shiva,
Yeah, got it. So thank you, sir. The next question is from Murugesh. Please let know on the growth of excipients for next 5 years.
I would preferably, if I knew it, I think it's a pass. I don't know. But I think overall, if I really look at the bulk drugs likely to grow at probably 7 to 10% is what is the general prediction. The excipients also should grow in that same pattern is what I feel.
Yeah, thank you, sir. And 2 more questions. I think with that we can end the session. This question is from Mr. Rajaram. Where is the investment and next phase of growth Indian pharma companies are looking going forward?
As I told you, a lot of, see, there is a specific field of molecules which are basically for oncology research, which I said cancer research, which are all high potent molecules. So this is an area which will require isolators, glove boxes, because it also affects the people who work in that environment if they are exposed to higher concentrations. So this one field is going to see significant growth, because most of the molecules which are being researched for the last 6-8 years belong to this field. The other field is the what I told about the sugar chemistry, the RNA, DNA type of approach to treatment, which is a group of molecules called as antisense compounds or the nucleotides and the nucleosides. This area is going to see a lot of potential.
Yeah, the next question is a common question by Mr. Balaji as well as Mr. Rohit. What is the role of artificial intelligence in pharma industry?
I think I answered this a little time before. I think the data analytics taking it to the next level would be the probable AI scope in the pharma industry. So that's all from sort of a broad perspective, but I think we may need to really consult with more experts, because most of my knowledge is application based as a sort of a doer who works with some of the Western companies. Whatever is the developments happening, I have tried to put all of this together, but I may not be an expert, and whatever I tell, I think you should also take it with a pinch of salt and then ratify it. But if I get any new information, I'll definitely pass on to the group. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Prabharan sir, I am unmuting your mic. I think you had a question. You can elaborate about it, sir.
No. I just want to thank Mr. Damodharan. I didn't pose any question. In fact, somebody asked about API industry.
Okay.
The PLI scheme details. I just gave some information on that.
Okay, sir. Got it.
Thank you, Mr. Damodharan.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So I think we have covered all the questions. Okay, there is one from Eril. I think Eril. Yeah, you can go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful session, sir. Sir, what is the opportunities of line automation and robotics in the pharma industries? How the industries are ready for investment for the robotics and automation for new technologies upcoming days?
I think the formulation market will definitely go into robotics sooner than later. So I think you said that you had some interactions with and then supplies to Dr. Reddy's. We are also looking at a lot of mechanization and robotic based interventions, right, from the equipment cleaning. Like, see, most of the most of the plants of the bulk drugs are all multi-purpose in nature. So they don't have a single plant which manufactures a single drug. So the cleaning, the time period of cleaning and the effectiveness of cleaning. So somewhere I found some sort of a drones, robotic based drones which are being used for cleaning the inside of the reactors. So there are a lot of opportunities coming up. So only thing is, if you offer a product, people will not buy. You have to offer a solution. So that's where I think, somewhere where I find the Indian companies struggle is they always try to market a product. But whereas what we are looking at is a sort of a solution. So if we are able to engage with the industry and then work out a sort of a packaged solution, I think the absorption will be faster.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I think we have completed the Q&A session, and we had maximum questions today. I think being pharma industry, the maximum questions has been answered very well and in a very stipulated method. So thank you very much, sir, for your answers, elaborate answers. Over to you, Tariq, sir.
Pleasure. It has been to meet all of you, meeting all of you. Thanks for patiently listening it through, because as much as I did it, I think thanks to all of you.